Welcome back for part two of our week two lecture. We're going to continue our discussion of understanding by design. We just finished talking about stage one, the desired results and the four parts of that. Now we'll go on to stage two, the assessment evidence. So setting goals is great, but we have to know whether or not our students are achieving those goals that we've set. Are we reaching our objectives? Are the students able to do the things that we expect them to do because they participated in the lesson? So we wrote our objectives as observable and measurable behaviors so that we could observe and measure them in stage two. Now there's an entire module later in the semester dedicated to assessment strategies in math and science. So this is sort of an overview of different types of assessment in a general sense, knowing that we're going to go into substantial depth in an upcoming module. So I organize assessments into categories, and these categories are not mutually exclusive. An assessment can be more than one of these labels. It's just categories that help you think about different styles of assessment. And there's value to doing different styles of assessment. Some students are good at performing in certain ways, and some students aren't. So if you assess in the same way every time, you may be getting less of what the student is learning and understanding and more of what they're good at in terms of the assessments. So having a variety of assessments is useful. It addresses multiple learning styles. It addresses multiple intelligences, which is a topic we're going to talk about in a later module as well. And it gives more students more various opportunities to show that they understand, and it's more engaging. You do the same types of assessments every time. I like to ask my students, do you remember your favorite worksheet you ever did? And usually the answer is no, there's no such thing as a favorite worksheet. But you might remember the favorite project you ever did or the favorite movie you ever made or something like that. Those things tend to stick with you a little bit better. They're more meaningful. They're more authentic. In other words, they better mirror the actual practice in the field that you're teaching. So authentic assessment is something that you should be thinking about. You should be trying to get your students to be engaged in your content if you really want them to enjoy it, if you really want them to immerse themselves in the content that you're teaching. So that's the first division here, the first two categories that I'll tell you. There's your traditional assessments, like your paper pencil quizzes, your tests, your worksheets, and your alternative assessments, having students do things that are not traditional. So really it's your paper pencil quizzes, tests, etc., and everything else. Doing videos, doing science labs, experimental design, making projects, designing, engineering design projects, things like that. Those are all alternatives to your traditional means. Generally speaking, alternative assessments require some sort of rubric to grade in order to make something that could be subjective into something that's more objective. We're going to talk about that, like I said, in an upcoming module. There are also formal and informal types of assessments. Formal assessments are assessments that go for a grade. Informal assessments, like checks for understanding, are not graded, but they do give information to the teacher. The whole purpose, the point of doing assessment is to get information. I want to know if the students are meeting those goals. And that information doesn't have to be a one-way road. So that brings us to our last division, summative versus formative. Summative, like a summary, happens at the end. And that is a one-directional flow of information. You get information about the students. Did the students get it? Yes or no? Formative happens during the learning process, and the assessment is in fact part of the learning process. So it's a two-way flow of information. You get information as to whether the students you get information as to whether the students are learning, but the students also get information about what they're learning as part of the assessment. So we have your traditional versus alternative. We have your formal versus informal, where you have graded or not graded checks for understanding. And then formative versus summative. Formative happening during the learning process, summative happening at the end. So we're going to talk about that a lot later, but it's important to have variety. There is a place for summative assessment. There's a place for formal assessment. There's a place for traditional assessment. Those aren't bad. But if you only do that, that is bad because it doesn't give the students a variety of ways to show that they understand. And it's important that you do that because success tends to breed success. If you have students who don't believe that they can be successful, they're not going to try very hard. So we'll talk more about that in an upcoming unit, but you should know about the types of assessments and why we do them. Stage 3, finally, this is the part that we think about as teaching, although these first 2 stages are what build the foundation so that this last stage can actually happen. This is your classroom practices. This is identifying what materials you're going to need, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. So looking at, let's go back to our templates. We can see in the lesson plan template, we have standards and objectives, and we have our assessments, and you should have a variety of kinds. And then below that, we've got our stage 3 components, the materials you're going to use, the anticipatory set. How are you going to catch the student's attention? How are you going to activate their prior knowledge? Because in math and science, everything builds on itself. Everything builds on what you've done previously. So it's important that we aren't compartmentalizing the information. It's not a series of facts and laws and theories. These are all closely intertwined and linked. So how are you going to connect what they've already done to what you're going to be doing? And then your specific procedures broken down into what you are going to do, what your role is as a teacher, and what the students are going to do. So every single step of the way, you're going to be doing something, but it's not just you. It's also what the students are doing as well. And then you should end with some sort of closure that will help link this class to the next class. This is your long and short-term planning. So speaking of long-term planning, we also have our unit template. And that also includes a stage 2, the assessments you're going to do, and a stage 3 with the learning activities. Now you'll see there is an acronym where to right here. If you're curious about what those things mean, or really anything in either of those templates mean, refer back to your textbook, and that where to element is on page 197, as all of the components of those templates are coming from this model and can be found in this textbook if you need a little bit more information on it. All right, so that in brief is the Understanding by Design framework. That's how we are formulating our model for how we're going to teach, how we are coming up with the ideas for how we're going to actually implement our plans in the class. So there's a lot that goes into that, and people who are from the outside don't really see that very much. We talked about that last week with the apprenticeship of observation. You only see one side of it. You don't see the background, all that goes into it. And as it turns out, I've read this several times before, but I found this article earlier today. Teachers make more decisions than a brain surgeon, more important decisions per minute than a brain surgeon does. So like people have jokingly told to me or said to me, oh, teaching, it's not rocket science, because I'm a physics teacher, which, is rocket science. But the thing is, it's just as hard. It's being a good teacher is just as hard as being a good anything, or harder. The important decisions you make have an impact not just on you, not just on your day and your class, but those students and their lives outside of the class. You have a amazing power, as the quote that I posted in our week 2 overview says. So looking at week 2, you can see there's a quote here at the beginning. There's an amazing power that teachers hold. So how do teachers make these many, many important decisions? Well, there is specialized knowledge that is applicable just to the field of teaching. And it's not just about teaching strategies. A man named Lee Schulman came up with an idea called pedagogical content knowledge. And the idea here is that we have pedagogical knowledge, which is the knowledge of teaching strategies. How do I implement a class discussion? What is a think, pair, share? All of these different problem-based learning, all these different models that we're going to talk about in an upcoming module in this class. But these teaching strategies, teaching models, pedagogical ideas, pedagogical theories, that all falls under this pedagogical knowledge category. So if you know all of those, great. But does that make you a good physics teacher? Not necessarily, unless you also have content knowledge. So Do you know the content that you're going to teach? Do I understand Newton's laws? Do I understand the theories of electromagnetism? In mathematics, do you understand the Pythagorean theorem, where it comes from, and the number theory behind whatever it might be? So you have to be an expert in your content as well as an expert in pedagogical knowledge, an expert teacher. And where those things overlap, where they come together, that's pedagogical content knowledge. How do I teach the selected content in the most effective way? And all of this, if I was to draw a big circle around the whole thing, would be the context. How do I teach my specific content in the most effective way for my students? Because not every student is going to learn the same way. Every year I get a new set of students, and every year they have new ways of learning. So I have to adapt my teaching strategies for the given content that I'm going to cover to meet the needs of my specific students. And that is what we call pedagogical content knowledge. I teach children mathematics. Not I teach mathematics and not I teach children, but I teach this group of students mathematics or physics or whatever your content might be. So that is pedagogical content knowledge. And actually, that's a framework that I used for designing and developing this course. So you'll notice some of the upcoming modules are pedagogical knowledge and content knowledge and contextual knowledge, right? That's those are all aspects of PCK. And understanding that, I think, is really important. Understanding that we as teachers have a very specialized set of knowledge, a specialized knowledge base that we draw from that other professions don't necessarily have. And that's it. As far as content goes, that's what I've got for you. I do want to talk briefly about the assignments for this week. There are 2 discussion boards. The first one is step 1 towards developing our unit plan. You're going to need to pick your content topic. It doesn't necessarily have to stay the same throughout the entire semester, but we only have 8 weeks, so we have to get started. We have to get going. We can't really waste any time. So you're going to pick a content topic, and it's not etched in stone. It might change, but we have to get started somewhere, so this is where we're going to start. You're going to pick a topic within your content area, and that will be the topic that we're going to start exploring for your unit plan. So this may change, but it's the one we're going to start with. 1, choose your content topic. That's your big idea. Number 2, you're going to list several standards that fit this topic. So you can start looking at the standards and see what topic that's outlined in the standards is something that you'd be interested in writing a unit plan on. 3, you're going to draft at least 1 enduring understanding, this big idea, overarching idea that's connected to your concept, and 1 essential question. This is a question that's related to your enduring understanding. It doesn't have an easy yes or no answer. Feel free to go online, look up some examples of essential questions and enduring understandings to see the format for them. Then you're going to list 3 to 5 behavioral objectives that you've created. We talked about that in the last video. And then comment, critique at least 2 of your classmates' posts. Look at them. Are their behavioral objectives observable and measurable? Is their essential question an easy question to answer? If it is, then it's not really a very good essential question. Look at their content topic. Is it too broad? Is it too narrow? Now, I know you're not experts, but by looking at other people and thinking about it critically, you're going to get better at recognizing these and making your own. So you're going to give it your best shot to give them some constructive feedbacks. And lastly, you're going to do a reading reflection. This is going to follow the same discussion board rubric we used last time. And you're going to answer the following prompt. How does understanding PCK make me a better teacher? So in order to answer that question, you're going to need to unpack what PCK is based on what you've read and what I talked about, and how that applies to you personally as a teacher. That's all I've got for you. Good luck, good work, and I'll see you next week.